They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what if it's a symphony? A meticulously composed destruction, note by agonizing note. They took my company, my love, my future. They thought they'd broken me. But a broken man, well, he has nothing left to lose. And everything to burn. A flickering neon sign cast a blood-red glow on the shattered glass facade of what was once the monolithic Thorne Corporation. Below, a news ticker scrolled relentlessly, massive corporate fraud unveiled, CEO Cassandra Thorne arrested. From a skyscraper across the street, Silas Vane watched, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He slowly sipped amber liquid, the ice clinking softly in the eerie silence. Was this a genuine victory, or merely the opening salvo in a far deeper, darker game? The amber liquid in Silas Vane's glass, mirroring the flickering neon sign of the ruined Thorne Corporation, was a liquid memory, a distilled essence of what was and what had been. He closed his eyes, and the city lights blurred, replaced by the soft glow of a desk lamp in a cramped, shared apartment, years ago. "We'll build something that lasts, Silas," Cassandra had whispered, her fingers tracing blueprints on a laminated tabletop. Her voice, then, was a melody of shared ambition, untainted by the steel it would later acquire. She was all sharp intellect and unbridled passion, a supernova in human form. Silas, the quiet architect, the meticulous planner, found himself orbiting her, his own brilliance finding purpose and direction in her daring vision. Thorne Corporation wasn't just a company, it was their sanctuary, a testament to their love, a monument to a dream they wove together from late-night coffees and whispered promises. He designed every floor, every beam, every pane of glass with the devotion of a craftsman building a home for his beloved. And she, with her shrewd mind and undeniable charisma, had laid the financial foundations, charmed investors, and navigated the shark-infested waters of corporate finance. They were an unstoppable force, a perfect duality. Or so he believed. The first tremor in their carefully constructed world was so subtle, Silas barely registered it. It was a new assistant, a fresh face Cassandra had hired almost on a whim, or so she claimed. Malakai Rook. Kai. He'd arrived with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a glint of something unreadable beneath a veneer of affable charm. Silas remembered their first meeting, Kai extending a hand, his grip surprisingly firm, a faint scent of something metallic, coppery, clinging to him, a strange detail Silas later dismissed as a trick of the stale office air. Cassandra had introduced him with an almost effusive warmth that struck Silas as slightly out of character for her usual professional reserve. "Kai's a prodigy, Silas," she'd said, her hand resting almost possessively on Kai's arm. "He's going to streamline everything." Initially, Kai was unobtrusive, gliding through the Thorne Corporation offices like a ghost, observing, absorbing. Silas, immersed in the intricate designs of their new, eco-friendly smart city initiative, his brainchild, a project he poured his soul into, barely noticed. He trusted Cassandra implicitly. Why wouldn't he? They were two halves of a whole, bound by years of shared struggle and triumph. If Cassandra saw potential in Kai, then potential there must be. This naive faith, this bedrock of unshakable loyalty, was Silas's blind spot, a chasm of trust that would later swallow him whole. The subtle shifts began. Silas would present a comprehensive architectural plan, weeks of meticulous work, only for Cassandra to nod vaguely, her gaze already drifting towards Kai, who would offer a seemingly innocuous suggestion. "Perhaps, Cassandra, if we reallocated these resources, a quicker return on investment, no?" It was never a direct challenge to Silas, never an outright dismissal. It was a gentle nudge, a whisper that seemed to resonate more deeply with Cassandra than Silas's reasoned arguments. He'd brush it off, attributing it to Kai's fresh perspective, Cassandra's newfound pragmatism. But the nudges grew more frequent, more pointed. Projects Silas considered foundational to Thorne Corporation's ethos, community housing, sustainable energy grids, began to lose funding, quietly deprioritized in favor of more overtly profitable, and less ethically robust, ventures. He'd protest, mildly at first. "Cassandra, the Green Corridor is integral to the entire West Tower's sustainability rating." She'd smile, a tight, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, the same smile she'd wear when closing a difficult deal. "Silas, darling, we have to be agile. The market demands flexibility." And Kai would be there, a silent shadow, sometimes offering a soft, almost imperceptible nod of agreement with Cassandra, sometimes just watching Silas with that unsettling, unreadable gaze. One afternoon, Silas discovered a significant portion of his smart city blueprint, a segment he'd spent months perfecting, had been quietly replaced. It was a subtle alteration, a shift from his integrated public transport system to a more privatized, vehicle-centric model that significantly increased carbon footprint but promised higher short-term revenue. He confronted Cassandra, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. "Cassandra, what is this? This goes against everything we planned, everything we promised the city council." She looked at him, her expression a careful blend of exasperation and concern. "Silas, we discussed this." Kai ran the numbers. The public transport system was simply not viable. "We need to focus on profitability, on expansion. You know how ruthless this market is." "But the integrity of the design," Silas started, his words trailing off as Cassandra turned away, already moving towards Kai, who stood patiently by the holographic display, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, a glint in his eyes that Silas couldn't quite decipher. It was a small betrayal, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, but it gnawed at Silas. He felt a cold dread creeping in, a realization that the vision they once shared was fracturing, splintering into something he no longer recognized. He swallowed his protests, convinced himself it was merely a necessary evil, a growing pain. Cassandra was under immense pressure. She was still his Cassandra, wasn't she? The woman who'd once shared his dreams, who'd painted sunsets with him on the walls of their first tiny office. This was the curse of his loyalty, the blind faith in their shared history. He clung to the memory of the woman he loved, failing to see the serpent coiling in the heart of their empire, nurtured by his own partner's ruthless ambition and the insidious whispers of a charming, manipulative stranger. The unaddressed grievances piled up, tiny cuts bleeding slowly, almost unnoticed. His suggestions were increasingly overlooked, his concerns dismissed as artistic idealism, his presence in crucial meetings becoming peripheral. He started spending more time in his office, poring over old blueprints, trying to rekindle the fire that had once burned so brightly between him and Thorne Corporation. But the warmth was fading, replaced by a growing chill, a sense of alienation in his own creation. He saw Cassandra and Kai together often, their heads bent in close conversation, their laughter echoing through the halls, a laughter that never quite included him. He rationalized it as professional camaraderie, a necessary evil of their burgeoning success. It was merely business, after all. But the knot in his stomach tightened with each passing day, a silent, growing testament to the viper he had allowed into their garden, his loyalty and love blinding him to the poison that was slowly, meticulously being injected into the very heart of his life. The crisp morning air, once a harbinger of ambition, now bit with a sudden, unfamiliar chill. Silas had just finished a call with a major client, the ink barely dry on a lucrative deal he'd personally spearheaded, when a cold, clipped voice from HR summoned him. Not an email, not a call, but a direct, unblinking summons delivered by a new, stony-faced assistant he'd never seen before. A flicker of unease, quickly dismissed. Perhaps a new directive, a bonus announcement, a last-minute adjustment to the quarterly report. He strode towards the executive floor, the familiar hum of Thorne Corp's polished glass and steel empire a comforting constant. The higher he ascended, the quieter it became, the air growing thinner, colder. He pushed open the heavy oak door to Julian Thorne's office, a room usually reserved for celebratory toasts or strategic wargaming. Instead, the atmosphere was funereal. Julian sat grim-faced behind his imposing mahogany desk, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by an almost skeletal pallor. Beside him, standing unervingly erect, was Kai. Not slouched, not smirking, but a picture of calculated, detached professionalism, his eyes like chips of glacial ice. And then, the breath caught in Silas's throat. Cassandra. She stood a little behind Julian, her face carefully neutral, a mask of disinterest that didn't quite conceal the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her lower lip. Silas, Julian began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, have a seat. The words felt like stones dropping into a deep well. Silas sank into the plush leather chair, a sense of foreboding settling like a shroud. This wasn't a bonus meeting. This was an ambush. Julian didn't mince words. He laid out a litany of charges, each one a razor-sharp shard of a lie, meticulously crafted to cut deep. Breach of fiduciary duty. Unauthorized asset reallocation. Insider trading, specifically involving the recent acquisition of Project Chimera patents. The words were clinical, damning. Silas felt a cold sweat prickle his skin. Project Chimera was his baby, the groundbreaking initiative he'd poured years of his life into, the very project that had brought Kai into their orbit. Every accusation was twisted, distorted, a grotesque caricature of his diligent work. The figures Julian cited were real, but their context had been painstakingly inverted, his legitimate actions reframed as deliberate acts of sabotage. The evidence is overwhelming, Silas, Julian continued, his voice laced with a genuine sadness that seemed to hurt Silas more than the accusations. We have an internal audit, corroborated by digital forensics. Transactions traced directly to your personal accounts, shell corporations, it's all here. Julian gestured to a thick binder on his desk, its cover emblazoned with the Thorne Corp logo, a symbol that now felt like a brand of shame. Silas looked at Kai. His partner, his friend, the man he'd welcomed into his home, into his life. Kai's gaze was unreadable, perhaps even a shade of amusement dancing in those depths. No, not amusement. Something colder, more predatory. A satisfaction that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. He wasn't just observing, he was reveling. The incompetence Silas had tolerated, dismissed, excused it was a performance, a carefully constructed facade to hide a mind of pure, malevolent cunning. This wasn't just about stealing a promotion or a few patents. This was about absolute destruction. Then, his eyes found Cassandra. She still hadn't looked at him directly, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond his shoulder, as if he were already a ghost. Her silence was deafening, her complicity a poison more potent than any lie Julian was reciting. She knew. She had to know. The tremors, the stolen glances, the quiet conversations with Kai, it wasn't professional camaraderie. It was a conspiracy. This is a mistake, Julian, Silas managed, his voice a strained whisper, as if a hand were clamped around his throat. These are fabrications. I can explain every single transaction. Project Chimera, it's designed to be off-book for initial R&D, for competitive advantage. You know this. We discussed this. Kai was involved in setting up the funding structure. Julian sighed, a deep, weary sound. Kai has provided us with a full disclosure. He assisted in the investigation once anomalies were detected. His testimony, combined with the forensic evidence, leaves no room for doubt. Kai. Kai. The name hung in the air, a bell-tolling betrayal. The casualness with which he had meticulously dismantled Silas's life, brick by agonizing brick, was breathtaking. He wasn't just a snake, he was a viper that had been nurtured at the breast, now spitting venom. Effective immediately, your employment with Thorne Corp is terminated, Julian stated, his voice regaining a measure of professional firmness, a necessary shield against the grim task. Security will escort you out. Your personal effects will be couriered to your residence. The humiliation began immediately. 2 hulking security guards, built like brick walls, stepped into the office the moment Julian finished speaking. Their presence was a physical manifestation of his sudden pariah status. Silas rose, feeling oddly detached, as if watching a scene unfold on a screen. He looked at Cassandra one last time. Her eyes finally met his, briefly, and in that fleeting moment, he saw it, not regret, not pity, but a cold, calculated flicker of victory. A sharp, icy pang went through his chest. It wasn't just a professional betrayal, it was personal. Deeply, savagely personal. The walk through the open-plan office felt like an eternity. Every head snapped up as he passed. The whispers followed him like hungry shadows, his name repeated in hushed, shocked tones. Silas Vane. Fired? No way. Breach of duty. Couldn't be him. Faces contorted in pity, shock, or worse, thinly veiled schadenfreude. He saw junior analysts he'd mentored, senior partners he'd collaborated with, even the administrative assistant who brought him his coffee every morning. Their expressions were a kaleidoscope of judgment. He felt naked, exposed, every fiber of his being screaming with the injustice of it. The guards were efficient, almost gentle, but their grip on his arms was firm, undeniable. He was being paraded, a public spectacle, a cautionary tale. This wasn't just a firing, it was a public execution of his reputation, his legacy, his very identity. This was Kai's twisted masterpiece, a performance designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. The elevator descent was tortuously slow, each floor a drop further into an abyss of despair. The lobby, usually a bustling hub of corporate life, now seemed to echo with his shame. He was ushered out, not through the main entrance, but a discreet side door, like a criminal being smuggled out under cover of darkness. The sunlight outside felt harsh, mocking. He hailed a taxi, the familiar streetscape blurring into an unrecognizable smear as the vehicle pulled away. His mind raced, fragmented thoughts crashing against each other like waves. Why? Why this level of cruelty? He replayed every conversation with Kai, every shared laugh, every late-night brainstorming session. He tried to pinpoint the moment the snake had truly burrowed its way in, the exact seam of his life that had been pried open. And then, Cassandra. The woman he loved, the woman he was supposed to marry. Her silence, her complicity. It wasn't just a corporate move, it was a scorched earth campaign waged on his entire existence. The taxi pulled up to the curb of their shared penthouse building, a monument to the life they were building together, now a hollow shell. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking. The quiet hum of the building's air conditioning seemed to amplify the frantic beat of his own heart. He pushed the door open. The immediate assault on his senses was nauseating. The lingering, cloying scent of cheap perfume mixed with an unfamiliar cologne that wasn't his own. A faint, almost imperceptible sound of hushed laughter from the living room. His blood ran cold. He stepped further in, his feet moving on their own, drawn by a dreadful magnetic pull. And then he saw them. Cassandra. On their designer sofa, hair disheveled, her silk robe askew. And Kai. Leaning over her, one hand tracing the curve of her exposed thigh, his head thrown back in a lazy, intimate laugh. The sight was a punch to the gut, stealing every ounce of air from his lungs. It wasn't just the physicality, it was the casual intimacy, the shared ease that spoke of a long-standing, ugly secret. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The fabricated charges, the public humiliation, the cold-hearted betrayal in Julian's office, it was all connected. This wasn't just about the company. This was about dismantling him, personally, intimately, spectacularly. Kai's incompetence was a smokescreen, his clumsiness a carefully orchestrated dance of chaos designed to blind and disarm. Cassandra gasped, pulling away from Kai as if scalded, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something that looked sickeningly like fear. Kai, however, merely straightened up, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. There was no apology in his eyes, no shame, only a chilling, triumphant glint. Silas, he purred, his voice dripping with false concern, fancy meeting you here. Rough day, I hear. The sheer audacity, the unadulterated cruelty of it, was a physical blow. Silas felt a red haze descend, a primal scream clawing its way up his throat, but no sound escaped. He felt numb, yet every nerve ending was on fire. This wasn't merely a dismissal, it was a meticulously planned act of psychological torture, designed not just to take everything he had, but to break him utterly, to leave him nothing but a hollowed-out husk. This was Kai's true genius, not in business, but in destruction. He reached into his pocket, his fingers fumbling, until they closed around the cool, smooth platinum of the engagement ring. The diamond, once a beacon of their future, now seemed to mock him, catching the light and reflecting the shattered fragments of his life. He didn't throw it, didn't hurl it at their perfidious faces. That would be too dramatic, too satisfying for them. Instead, with a horrifying, quiet precision that belied the earthquake raging within him, he walked to the sleek glass coffee table between them. He lowered his hand, his gaze fixed on Cassandra's pale, trembling face, and gently, almost reverently, placed the ring down. The faint click of the metal against the glass echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence. It was a promise, not of love, but of retribution. A quiet, terrifying vow that spoke of a future far darker and more unforgiving than any of them could possibly imagine. He turned, his eyes burning with a cold, clear light, and walked out, leaving them in the ruins of the life they had so casually, so cruelly, destroyed. The scent of cheap disinfectant clung to Silas like a shroud as he stepped out of Thorne Corp for the last time, the weight of Cassandra's cruel betrayal pressing down on him. The diamond ring, his symbol of a life irrevocably shattered, was a silent curse. He didn't look back. There was nothing there for him now but ash and bitter memories. He needed a plan, not just revenge, but a surgical dismantling. Thorne Corp had taken everything, he would ensure they paid in kind. His target emerged within days, Apex Dynamics, a rising star in the tech sector, Thorne's direct competitor. Their CEO, Eleanor Vance, was a legend, sharp, ruthless, and known for poaching top talent from failing giants. Silas, a ghost of his former self, secured a meeting, the lie about seeking new challenges rolling off his tongue with chilling ease. Vance, shrewd and observant, saw something in his cold resolve, a fire beneath the ice. She hired him, not just for his expertise, but for the unspoken hunger in his eyes, a hunger she mistook for ambition. Silas plunged into Apex Dynamics, a man possessed. He worked relentlessly, mapping Thorne Corp's vulnerabilities with the precision of a master cartographer sketching enemy lines. Every weakness he'd identified during his tenure, every backdoor, every overlooked flaw in their data security, their supply chain, their corporate structure, was meticulously documented. He cross-referenced, he simulated, he built an elaborate, damning dossier on the very company he'd helped build. His desktop glowed late into the night, a mosaic of spreadsheets, encrypted files, and schematics. This wasn't work, it was a crusade. He was no longer just an executive, he was a silent saboteur, each click of his mouse a calculated move on a chessboard only he understood. The taste of retribution, though distant, was already on his tongue, acrid and intoxicating. Meanwhile, within the gilded cage of Thorne Corp, a new reign of terror had begun, led by the newly promoted head of employee engagement, Malakai, Rook. Cassandra, blinded by her belief in Kai's disruptive genius and the convenient scapegoat he provided for her own ruthless ambition, had given him free rein. The initial changes were subtle, almost quirky. Mandatory team-building exercises that involved forced interpretive dance. Brainstorming sessions that devolved into competitive staring contests. Employees exchanged bewildered glances, but Kai, with his unsettlingly wide grin and vacant eyes, insisted it was all for synergy and unleashing untapped potential. Then, the chaos escalated. Kai introduced the Thorne Corp happiness quota. Each employee was required to log a minimum of 3 authentic moments of joy per day into a proprietary app, complete with photo or video evidence. Failure to meet the quota resulted in happiness remediation sessions, public shaming rituals held in the main atrium. Employees were made to wear giant, neon-orange, sad sacks and recite corporate mantras while their colleagues, desperate to avoid the same fate, clapped along with forced cheer. The atmosphere was a grotesque parody of corporate optimism, a chilling ballet of forced smiles and simmering resentment. It's about fostering a culture of positive reinforcement. Kai chirped during an internal memo, his voice devoid of warmth, echoing through the company's intercom system. We're not just selling products, we're selling joy. And if you're not joyful, you're not pulling your weight. The first public shaming was a young intern named Sarah, caught looking despondent after a particularly grueling shift. Kai paraded her onto a makeshift stage, clutching a microphone. Sarah here, he announced, his voice booming, has shown a distinct lack of vibrancy. Let's help Sarah find her inner sparkle. He then led the entire floor in a chant of sparkle, Sarah, sparkle, while Sarah, face beat red, fought back tears. The incident went viral internally, clips covertly shared on encrypted chats, igniting a furious undercurrent of fear and anger. The leaks began subtly. Silas, operating from the sterile anonymity of his Apex Dynamics office, painstakingly curated snippets of Thorne Corp's new reality. He didn't drop everything at once, that would be too obvious, too easily traced. Instead, he started with the happiness quota memo, anonymizing the source, and feeding it to a popular, sardonic online community known for mocking corporate absurdities. The comment section exploded. Trevor Phillips, face screaming in fear, face screaming in fear, face screaming in fear, face screaming in fear, is this real life? One user exclaimed, reflecting the sheer disbelief. This isn't a company, it's a social experiment gone wrong, another posted. Next came the Surveillance as Motivation initiative. Kai installed AI-powered cameras that constantly monitored facial expressions for engagement and alertness. Desks were fitted with sensors tracking posture and keyboard activity. Employees were given Thorne tokens for optimal performance, redeemable for extra work hours or access to Kai's motivational seminars. Poor performance resulted in a public, real-time productivity scoreboard displayed on screens throughout the building, names glowing red for low performers. Imagine the efficiency. Kai gushed to a bewildered Cassandra, who, despite a flicker of unease, still clung to the narrative that Kai was simply pushing boundaries. No more slacking. Everyone will be a peak performer. Cassandra, in her gilded corner office, occasionally winced at the increasingly bizarre reports, but dismissed them as growing pains. Disruption always looks messy at first, she'd tell her dwindling circle of loyal executives, her voice laced with forced conviction. Kai is just untraditional. But even she couldn't ignore the swelling tide of employee resignations. The turnover rate soared to unprecedented levels. Talented individuals, unable to stomach the constant surveillance and dehumanizing rituals, fled Thorne Corp as if it were a sinking ship. Some left quietly, others, emboldened by the online uproar, posted scathing, anonymous reviews on job sites, painting Thorne Corp as a dystopian nightmare. Silas meticulously collected these public testimonies, cross-referencing them with his internal data. He leaked the internal memos detailing the surveillance system, coupling them with anonymized screenshots from the productivity scoreboard. He even managed to obtain a recording of Kai's gleeful, chilling explanation of his happiness remediation program, which he released to a niche but influential tech ethics blog. The blog post went viral, picked up by mainstream news outlets. Thorne Corp became a national punchline, a case study in corporate overreach and absurdist tyranny. The company's stock, once unshakable, began to falter, shedding value with each new, viral revelation of Kai's madness. Cassandra, perched precariously atop her crumbling empire, felt the ground shifting beneath her. Her calls to Kai were met with cheerful indifference, his assurances that this is all part of the process, Cass, doing little to soothe her mounting panic. The board was demanding answers. Investors were pulling out. Yet, her pride, her sheer stubborn refusal to admit she had made a catastrophic error, kept her from reining Kai in. She doubled down, issuing public statements denying the allegations, blaming disgruntled former employees, and misinformation campaigns. It was a futile gesture, like trying to plug a dam with a finger, as Kai, oblivious or perhaps deliberately indifferent to the fallout, continued his twisted experiments, pushing Thorne Corp deeper into the abyss, a corporate Titanic hurtling towards an iceberg of its own making. Silas watched, a ghost in the machine, knowing his work had only just begun. The rage was still there, a cold, burning ember, but now it was tempered by a grim satisfaction. This was not just about revenge, it was about exposing the rot, piece by painstaking piece, until Thorne Corp collapsed under its own weight. Silas watched the digital flames consume Thorne Corp, a morbid spectator to a fire he'd helped ignite. For weeks, a grim satisfaction had gnawed at him, a cold comfort as Kai's innovations, insidious, self-destructing algorithms and chaos-inducing management protocols, systematically devoured the company from within. Cassandra, blinded by her own manufactured brilliance and a desperate need to appear disruptive, had championed every one of Kai's lunatic proposals. She called it aggressive synergy. Silas knew it for what it was, corporate harikiri, performed by a smiling sociopath. The initial tremors had been subtle, plummeting customer satisfaction scores dismissed as adjustments to a new paradigm, inexplicable system crashes attributed to necessary growing pains, and a bizarre, cult-like loyalty forming around Kai among the younger, more impressionable employees. Cassandra, high on the fumes of her own self-importance, had only seen validation. Malakai is a visionary, a true maverick, she'd crowed in an internal memo, oblivious that her maverick was systematically dismantling the very foundation she stood on. Silas had allowed it, even encouraged it indirectly, dropping breadcrumbs of information, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of mid-level managers that were always immediately dismissed by Cassandra, thus pushing her further into Kai's orbit. He wanted to see Thorne Corp burn, yes, but he also wanted the rot exposed, the hypocrisy laid bare for all to see. He envisioned a meticulous, almost surgical collapse, a public autopsy of corporate malfeasance. What he was getting, however, was a train wreck in slow motion, an uncontrolled detonation that was rapidly veering off his intended course. The true scale of Kai's nihilism first truly registered when the Thorne Connect 2.0 platform launched. Touted as a revolutionary, AI-driven client interface, it was instead a digital Molotov cocktail. The AI, apparently designed by Kai to optimize for pure, unadulterated efficiency, began to subtly, then overtly, insult clients, mock their requests, and, terrifyingly, started leaking sensitive, unredacted personal data in response to benign queries, framing it as hyper-personalized transparency. The first few incidents were brushed off as glitches, quickly patched. But the leaks persisted, becoming more targeted, more malicious, almost as if the AI itself had a vendetta. Then came the dynamic pricing model that changed quotes mid-transaction, often doubling or tripling them without warning, or the predictive staffing algorithm that fired employees based on fabricated metrics of future disloyalty. It was algorithmic terror, and Cassandra, remarkably, defended it as bold innovation that challenges the status quo. Her delusion was a force field, deflecting all reality. The dam broke during Thorne Corp's much-hyped Future Forward Summit, a live-streamed global event intended to restore investor confidence and unveil Kai's latest triumph. Silas, watching from his secluded apartment, a half-empty glass of whiskey clutched in his hand, felt a cold dread settle in his gut. The stage was a spectacle of holographic projections and shimmering lights. Cassandra, dressed in a power suit that screamed unbothered Titan, took the podium, her smile plastered on, radiating an almost pathological confidence. She introduced Kai as the architect of tomorrow, a genius unfettered by conventional thinking. Kai, looking deceptively calm in a tailored suit, stepped onto the stage, a mischievous glint in his eyes. He began his presentation, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble, speaking of disruption as a virtue and redefining corporate ethics. He brought up a massive data visualization, ostensibly to showcase Thorne Corp's unprecedented growth. But something shifted. The elegant graphs began to morph, twisting into grotesque, spiderweb patterns. Suddenly, a block of text flashed across the screen behind him, raw and unedited: Project Grim Reaper, client data monetization, optimizing vulnerabilities for max profit. A gasp rippled through the live audience. Cassandra, her smile faltering, shot a bewildered look at the tech crew. Kai, however, didn't flinch. He leaned into the microphone, a chillingly calm expression on his face. You see, true innovation isn't about incremental gains. It's about dismantling the facade, exposing the raw, beating heart of commerce. Every one of you, every data point, every transaction, it's all just fodder. He chuckled, a dry, unsettling sound. We merely provide the grist mill. As the text on screen scrolled faster, revealing internal memos discussing the intentional exploitation of legal loopholes, the deliberate obfuscation of service fees, and even coded discussions about suppressing whistleblower complaints, the audience erupted. Murmurs escalated into shouts. Then, the horror show truly began. Kai, seemingly bored with the digital display, calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, brightly colored toy, a plastic dinosaur. He placed it on the podium, then, with a disturbing, almost theatrical flourish, stomped on it. The cheap plastic crunched under his heel, a disproportionately loud sound in the suddenly hushed hall. This, Kai announced, his voice booming through the shocked silence, is your trust. This, he added, grinding the broken pieces with his foot, is your privacy. And this, he concluded, sweeping the debris off the podium with a dismissive gesture, is Thorne Corp's regard for both. Before security could react, a man from the audience, an agitated shareholder, leaped onto the stage, screaming about his life savings. Kai, instead of retreating, met him halfway, a glint of genuine mania in his eyes. What happened next was a blur of motion, a swift, brutal shove that sent the man sprawling. The camera, still live streaming, caught the entire, ugly scene, the shareholder hitting his head on the edge of the stage, the sudden silence, then the panicked screams. Kai stood over him, breathing heavily, a predatory grin stretching his lips. Any other questions? He challenged the stunned crowd, his eyes blazing with a dangerous, unhinged glee. The feed cut out abruptly. Silas dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, mirroring the fractured image of Thorne Corp now surely collapsing. The news channels exploded. Thorne Corp CEO hospitalized after on-stage assault, screamed one headline. Data breach of epic proportions revealed live on stream, blared another. The stock plummeted, evaporating billions in minutes. Lawsuits rained down like biblical plagues. Regulatory bodies, long complacent, suddenly descended like vultures. Thorne Corp wasn't teetering, it was in freefall. Cassandra's public unraveling was swift and brutal. From defiant denial on a hastily arranged press conference, to tearful, incoherent ramblings, and finally, reports of her being admitted for exhaustion and severe psychological distress. She was a broken doll, a husk of the woman who had once dismissed Silas with such arrogant disdain. Silas had wanted her to lose everything, yes, but not like this. Not in a public spectacle of madness and violence orchestrated by a true monster. He looked at the wreckage, not just of Thorne Corp, but of the entire sector. Other companies, fearing similar attacks or contagion, pulled back on risky innovations. Investor confidence in the tech industry was shaken to its core. Kai hadn't just exposed the rot, he'd infected the well. His actions weren't strategic or targeted, they were purely destructive, an act of corporate nihilism that bordered on terrorism. Trevor Phillips. Silas muttered to himself, a grim understanding dawning. Kai was worse. He wasn't just chaos, he was intelligent chaos, precisely calibrated to maximize damage for no discernible gain beyond the pleasure of destruction itself. The cold ember of revenge in Silas's heart began to chill, replaced by a deep, gnawing unease. He had wanted Thorne Corp to pay for its sins, to be publicly humiliated and dismantled. But Kai's scorched earth policy was burning down the very ground upon which Silas himself had built his career, the industry he had once believed in, however flawed. This wasn't merely vengeance, it was an uncontrolled conflagration threatening to consume everything, including the very idea of ethical innovation, the belief that technology could be a force for good. He had orchestrated this. He had pulled the strings, set the stage for Kai to ascend. His initial satisfaction felt like ash in his mouth. Was he any better than Thorne Corp, or even Kai, for allowing this level of indiscriminate destruction? He had enabled a monster to punish another monster, and now the collateral damage was escalating beyond anything he had conceived. The ethical dilemma clawed at him, a viper in his chest. His vengeance, so carefully nurtured, had metastasized into something malignant. If he continued to let Kai burn, what would be left? A wasteland. His hands, though not directly covered in the digital blood, felt stained. He had wanted justice, but what Kai had delivered was anarchy. Could he truly stand by and watch an entire industry segment, potentially even innocent people who relied on these systems, be annihilated? Or did he have a responsibility, a moral imperative, to step in, to mitigate the chaos, even if it meant sacrificing the sweet, bitter taste of complete revenge? The thought was repugnant, yet it lingered, a stubborn ember of his former self, still flickering in the overwhelming darkness. He had wanted them to lose everything, but at what cost to his own soul? And more pressingly, at what cost to the world he claimed to protect? The line between avenger and accomplice had blurred, then vanished entirely. The lingering embers of Silas's former self flickered, then guttered. The sweet, bitter taste of complete revenge had curdled into a sickly moral ambiguity. He'd wanted Thorne Corp to crumble, to face a public reckoning for their betrayal, but Malakai Rook, had not merely brought them to their knees, he was actively dismantling the very foundations of the industry, piece by calculated, chaotic piece. The line between avenger and accomplice hadn't just blurred, it had dissolved entirely, leaving Silas standing in a moral void, questioning the cost not just to his soul, but to the broader world he had once, foolishly perhaps, sought to protect. This wasn't just corporate espionage, it felt like a contagion, a plague deliberately unleashed. He was in his office, the cityscape a muted watercolor beyond the panoramic windows, when his secure line, usually reserved for his closest, most trusted confidants, chimed with an unknown, encrypted call. He hesitated, a finger hovering over the screen, the ghost of 1,000 past betrayals making him wary. Who else knew this number? And why now, when his own equilibrium was a tightly coiled spring, ready to snap? The display simply read, unmasked. A curious, almost taunting pseudonym. He tapped to accept. Silas Thorne. A woman's voice, cool and precise, cut through the static, devoid of warmth, yet laced with an undeniable urgency. My name is Anya Sharma. I used to be Thorne Corp's chief ethics officer. I've seen what Kai is doing from the inside, and I'm afraid you're only scratching the surface. Silas felt a jolt. Anya Sharma. The name was vaguely familiar, a ghost from his past life, a woman known for her uncompromising integrity, a reputation so pristine it had almost been a liability in Thorne Corp's cutthroat culture. He remembered brief, formal interactions, her quiet disapproval of certain aggressive merger tactics, her unyielding adherence to compliance. She'd vanished from the company records months ago, just after Kai's rapid ascent. Ms. Sharma, he replied, his voice a low, controlled rumble, what makes you think I'd be interested in anything you have to say about Thorne Corp, particularly from someone who, if I recall, departed under rather opaque circumstances? My departure was anything but opaque, Mr. Thorne. It was a calculated purge of anyone who might expose the rot Kai was cultivating, she retorted, her voice hardening, losing none of its precision. And you should be interested because the man you've empowered, directly or indirectly, isn't just incompetent or a greedy opportunist. He's a predator. A sophisticated, almost artistic vandal. And Thorne Corp was merely his proving ground. He's already set his sights on the next target, and the next after that. I have proof, incontrovertible, undeniable proof, that Malakai Rook is not just dismantling companies, but the very concept of corporate integrity itself. The chilling certainty in her voice resonated with the unease that had been gnawing at him. Anya Sharma wasn't prone to hyperbole. He pictured her in his mind's eye, sharp, unassuming, a data hawk with an unwavering moral compass. If she was reaching out, it wasn't for revenge or petty grievances. It was for something far more serious. Proof. Silas leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, the cynicism temporarily receding, replaced by a morbid fascination. Meet me. My office. Half an hour. Encrypted connection, no digital footprint. She arrived exactly 30 minutes later, not in some cloak-and-dagger trench coat, but in practical, tailored business attire, her face tired but resolute. She carried a single, nondescript data chip. No theatrics, no grand pronouncements. Just a quiet determination that spoke volumes. Mr. Thorne, she began, her gaze direct, unwavering, I've spent the last 6 months compiling this. It's a digital archaeology project, tracing the systemic collapse not just of Thorne Corp's internal structures, but of 3 other, seemingly unrelated corporations over the past 5 years. All of them experienced eerily similar patterns of internal sabotage, financial mismanagement that spiraled into insolvency, and a complete breakdown of employee morale, invariably triggered by a specific, strategically placed individual in a position of low-level, yet pivotal, authority. Silas listened, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He had seen the chaos at Thorne Corp, but he had dismissed it as Kai's particular brand of destructive incompetence, fueled by his own negligence. Anya, however, was painting a far more disturbing picture. She projected data streams onto his office wall, intricate flowcharts of shell corporations, untraceable digital transactions funneling funds into untraceable offshore accounts, encrypted communications containing coded instructions. This, she explained, pointing to a cluster of red lines converging on a single, anonymized IP address, is where the instructions originated. This is Kai's digital signature. He never touched the money directly, never left a physical trace. He engineered the conditions for collapse, then vanished, leaving the chaos behind like a calling card. She then pulled up case files, meticulously detailed analyses of employee sabotage, insider trading, intellectual property theft, all occurring after Kai had been embedded in a specific department, usually in a seemingly innocuous role like logistics coordinator or efficiency analyst. He exploits the cracks, Anya continued, her voice gaining a clinical edge. He finds the disgruntled, the greedy, the naive. He whispers in their ears, plants the seeds of distrust, encourages petty larceny that escalates into grand theft, fosters rivalries that become corporate fratricide. He doesn't just steal money, he weaponizes human weakness. Thorne Corp was just his latest, grandest canvas. He systematically corrupted their data, alienated their key talent, dissolved their most valuable contracts, all while appearing to be the blundering fool, the easily manipulated pawn. And Silas, he enjoyed it. He reveled in the destruction. The words hit Silas like a physical blow. Enjoyed it. The sheer malice, the calculated joy in dismantling, in causing widespread panic and financial ruin. This wasn't just a simple betrayal, it was a psychological operation, a twisted performance art of corporate destruction. The Trevor Phillips comparison flashed in his mind again, but now it wasn't an exaggerated joke, it was a terrifyingly accurate descriptor. Kai wasn't merely incompetent, he was a sociopath, a high-functioning chaos agent masquerading as a disgruntled mid-level manager. His own actions, his single-minded pursuit of revenge against Thorne Corp, had inadvertently provided Kai with the perfect smokescreen, the ideal environment to unleash his specific brand of corporate terrorism. Anya then showed him a predictive model, based on Kai's past patterns, indicating his next target, a nascent, rapidly growing tech startup, flush with venture capital, whose innovative blockchain technology threatened the established financial institutions. He's already there, she said, tapping a finger on a holographic representation of the startup's organizational chart, a small red dot indicating Kai's subtle infiltration. Under a new alias, a new backstory, posing as a freelance consultant. If we don't stop him, this company, built on the promise of transparency, will be his next masterpiece of destruction. The implications were staggering. Silas had been playing chess, aiming for a singular checkmate, while Kai was playing a multi-board game of global-scale demolition derby. His personal revenge suddenly seemed petty, almost irrelevant in the face of such calculated, widespread malice. His self-preservation instinct, once focused on protecting his own reputation and future, now screamed that if Kai wasn't stopped, no company, no individual, was truly safe from his insidious influence. A cold, hard resolve solidified in Silas's gut, replacing the moral queasiness. The thought of letting this sociopath continue, unchecked, simply because he was indirectly serving Silas's revenge, was utterly repugnant. He had been a bystander, an unwitting accomplice to a far greater evil. His 9-step structure had been thrown out the window, replaced by a brutal new reality. The game had changed. And he needed to change with it. He needs to be exposed, Silas stated, the words clipped, precise, each one a hammer blow striking against the anvil of his renewed purpose. Not just for Thorne Corp, but for every company he's destroyed, and everyone he plans to destroy. This isn't about me getting back what I lost anymore. This is about stopping a plague. Anya watched him, her expression unreadable. It will be messy, Mr. Thorne. Exposing Kai means exposing the extent of his infiltration, and that will inevitably highlight Thorne Corp's vulnerability, your own strategic oversights. Your public image, the human company's narrative you've been cultivating, could be collateral damage. People will ask why you didn't see it sooner, why you let it happen. Silas gave a humorless laugh, a rough sound that scraped at his throat. Let them ask. Let them condemn. If sacrificing my carefully curated public image is the price for unmasking him, then so be it. The human company's initiative was built on the promise of transparency, of ethical conduct. It was meant to be a shield for companies, a beacon for good. But now, he paused, his eyes narrowing, a dangerous glint entering their depths, now it will be a weapon. A precision instrument to dissect Kai's destructive methods, to lay bare his pathology for the entire world to see. We will use its very ethical framework to expose his unethical core. We will shine such a bright light on his methods that no company falls prey to such madness again. His motivation had become a complex, volatile cocktail, the lingering, bitter taste of personal revenge, now amplified by a chilling sense of righteous indignation, a primal drive for self-preservation, recognizing that Kai's chaos was a threat to all established order, including his own burgeoning empire, and a twisted sense of justice, where the ends, however morally ambiguous, justified the means. He would outmanipulate the manipulator, outstrategize the strategist. He would dive into the very heart of the chaos he had inadvertently helped unleash, and emerge, not as a victim, but as a reluctant, perhaps even tarnished, champion. The clean fight was over. Now, it was time to get his hands dirty. This wasn't just about winning, it was about ensuring Kai lost everything, not just his freedom, but his very ability to corrupt. And if a little chaos had to be stirred up along the way, if his own image had to take a hit, then so be it. The Trevor Phillips inside him, the one he tried so desperately to suppress, was finally being unleashed, but this time, with a specific, calculated, destructive purpose. The grand hall of the Omni Global Convention Center hummed with a tension thick enough to cut with a dull knife. Chandeliers, dazzling like frozen tears, cast a brittle gleam over the assembled titans of industry, the ravenous media, and the somber faces of Thorne Corp's dwindling board. Today wasn't just a summit, it was a wake, a public execution. The whispers carried the scent of ruin. Thorne Corp, once an unassailable colossus, was on the brink of declaring bankruptcy. Everyone expected a somber eulogy, a formal acknowledgement of a fallen giant, perhaps a scapegoat or two. They were about to get an apocalypse. Silas walked onto the raised stage, a solitary figure against the panoramic LED backdrop displaying the Global Business Ethics Summit logo. He wasn't the same man who'd once chased Kai through the labyrinthine corridors of Thorne Corp with righteous indignation. His tailored suit was sharp, his posture rigid, but in his eyes, a cold, unwavering fire had replaced the old flicker of idealism. Anya stood a respectful distance behind him, her gaze a steady anchor, a silent promise. The murmurs died down, replaced by the collective click of cameras. Good morning, esteemed colleagues, media, and citizens, Silas's voice, amplified but calm, resonated through the hall. We gather today to discuss the collapse of Thorne Corporation. Many attribute it to a series of unfortunate misjudgments or gross incompetence. Today, I am here to disabuse you of that notion. He paused, letting the words hang, weighted with unspoken challenge. On the screen behind him, the Thorne Corp logo dissolved, replaced by a stylized, intricate mosaic of shifting, fragmented patterns. What we unveil today is not a story of incompetence, but a meticulously orchestrated campaign of destruction. A masterpiece of calculated chaos, executed by one Malakai, Rook. We call it the Serpent's Scale. The first few slides were clinical, damning. Silas laid out the timeline of Thorne Corp's downfall, the sudden, inexplicable supply chain breakdowns, the bizarrely mismanaged mergers, the inexplicable financial oversights that bled assets dry. He didn't just present data, he wove a narrative, connecting seemingly disparate events. Consider the botched acquisition of Solara Dynamics, Silas narrated, his voice devoid of emotion, which not only crippled Thorne's R&D but simultaneously enriched shell companies later traced to a network operated by Rook's former associates. Not a mistake. A diversion. A classic feint. He moved through the specifics, the accidental deletion of proprietary algorithms that perfectly coincided with a rival's suspiciously similar product launch, the oversight that granted exorbitant, non-recoverable contracts to a vendor consortium later revealed to be managed by Kai's extended family. Each point was backed by irrefutable, cross-referenced documentation, displayed briefly on the screen for the cameras to capture, then replaced by another facet of the sprawling conspiracy. The audience, initially merely curious, began to stir, a low, collective hum of disbelief rising from the floor. Cassandra Thorne, seated in the front row, stiffened, her perfectly coiffed hair and stern expression betraying nothing but controlled disdain. She'd heard it all before, the accusations against Kai. Lies. Slander. But Thorne Corp was merely the grand finale, Silas continued, his voice now taking on a chilling precision. The culmination of a long, distinguished career in corporate demolition, perfected across multiple unsuspecting enterprises. The screen shifted again. Thorne Corp vanished, replaced by a stark, almost minimalist graphic, 3 other company logos appearing sequentially, each with a jagged, scarlet crack running through them. Before Thorne Corp, there was Viridian Tech. A pioneering force in sustainable energy. Its downfall was attributed to unforeseen market shifts and poor strategic forecasting. Lies. Silas clicked to a new slide, revealing intricate network diagrams. Rook, under the guise of an innovation consultant, was brought in to streamline Viridian's data infrastructure. What he actually did was introduce a series of subtle, undetectable vulnerabilities, backdoors that allowed for the systematic theft of their core intellectual property. He didn't hack, he built the weaknesses in. He left the front door open, then reported it as a breach caused by employee negligence or outdated security protocols, diverting blame, creating chaos, and making the company ripe for hostile acquisition by a competitor who, coincidentally, suddenly possessed Viridian's cutting-edge designs. The audience gasped. This wasn't just fraud, it was industrial terrorism disguised as bureaucratic bumbling. Then there was Ares Logistics, Silas pressed on, showing another shattered logo. Their collapse was blamed on catastrophic infrastructure failures and ineffective supply chain management. Again, Kai was at the helm, brought in to optimize their global distribution network. His optimizations included the deliberate misrouting of critical shipments, the subtle sabotage of automated warehouse systems to cause bottlenecks, and the systematic mismanagement of maintenance schedules to ensure predictable, spectacular breakdowns. He wasn't just diverting goods, he was eroding trust, causing widespread panic among clients, and driving down stock prices, making Ares vulnerable to a leveraged buyout that coincidentally benefited a shadowy investment group with ties to his offshore accounts. The room was no longer humming, it was silent, save for the frantic scribbling of reporters and the occasional, sharp intake of breath. This wasn't incompetence. This was a dark artistry. The Trevor Phillips comparison was beginning to crystallize, not in raw physical violence, but in the sheer, unhinged genius for calculated, systemic destruction. Kai didn't just break things, he broke them in ways that looked like accidents, like natural disasters, like the universe itself conspiring against the target. He relished the chaos, the unpredictable fallout, the sheer theatricality of it all. Miles away, in a penthouse suite overlooking the city, Malakai, Rook watched the live broadcast, a tumbler of amber liquid poised near his lips. His signature plastic smile, usually glued in place, had begun to twitch. He'd expected Silas to gloat, to reveal Thorne Corp's secrets. But this was different. Silas wasn't just picking apart his work, he was dissecting his method. He was exposing the hidden joy Kai took in orchestrating disaster, the thrill of making chaos look like a clumsy mistake. Silas projected a detailed psychological profile on the screen, compiled from expert analyses and Kai's own digital footprints. Rook's incompetence wasn't a flaw, it was his greatest weapon. He weaponized bureaucracy, exploited corporate inertia, and leveraged human error. He created systems designed to fail, then watched, delighted, as the dominoes fell. He wasn't aiming for profit in the traditional sense, profit was merely a byproduct. His true gratification came from the spectacle of unraveling, the systemic implosion, the chaos he could call bad luck or market forces. In the penthouse, Kai's hand trembled, spilling some of his drink. The smile was gone, replaced by a rictus of confusion, then a flicker of annoyance. He'd been so careful, so meticulous. Every flaw, every oversight, had been engineered to be just plausible enough, just deniable enough. But Silas had seen through the performance. He was laying bare the carefully constructed persona, the mask of the well-meaning but hopelessly clumsy manager. And now, the world was seeing it too. His eyes, usually gleaming with cunning amusement, narrowed into pinpricks of pure, unadulterated hatred. Back at the summit, the camera zoomed in on Cassandra Thorne. Her face, initially a mask of defiance, was now contorted in a horrifying blend of disbelief and dawning horror. Her empire, built on her father's legacy and her own relentless ambition, was not merely collapsing, it was being revealed as a hollow shell, an unwitting stage for a madman's performance. The audience's eyes, once on Silas, were now fixed on her, judging, condemning. She was not the victim they pitted, she was the enabler, the blind queen whose court had been infiltrated by a jester with a bomb strapped to his chest. Silas delivered the coup de grace. The serpent scale, ladies and gentlemen, represents not just Kai Rook's past actions, but his future intentions. He doesn't want to run companies, he wants to dismantle them. He doesn't seek power, he seeks chaos. His every failure was a calculated step towards a greater, more pervasive destabilization. This man is not just a white-collar criminal, he is a force of nature, a corporate hurricane that leaves behind not just bankruptcy, but broken trust, shattered lives, and a chilling question: how many other unfortunate incidents in our global economy were, in fact, the work of another serpent scale? The silence in the hall was deafening, broken only by the rapid-fire clicks of cameras and the quiet sobs that began to escape Cassandra Thorne. The weight of public scrutiny, the absolute devastation of Silas's revelations, was too much. Her meticulously constructed world, her sanity, her very identity, began to fragment. Her face, pale as ash, crumpled. She clutched her chest, a guttural cry tearing from her throat, before slumping forward, collapsing onto the pristine marble floor. A flurry of commotion erupted as medics rushed forward, but no one looked away from the stage. In his penthouse, Kai let out a low, guttural growl, his face twisted into an ugly, primal mask. The sophisticated, detached observer was gone. He looked like a cornered animal, all sharp angles and exposed nerve endings. His carefully curated image, the facade of the charming, slightly eccentric visionary, had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, pulsating core of the chaos agent. The plastic smile had not merely cracked, it had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, revealing the true beast beneath. This wasn't just losing, this was being seen. And for Kai, that was the ultimate, unforgivable destruction. The world would know his name now, not as the bumbling genius, but as the deliberate architect of ruin. And the thought, even in his rage, held a twisted, horrifying thrill. The dust settled not with a whisper, but a seismic groan that echoed through every financial district, every newsroom, every home connected to the digital pulse. Thorne Corp, once an unassailable monolith, had crumbled. The legal proceedings were swift, almost brutally efficient, a meticulously choreographed public execution that left no doubt as to the corporation's demise. Its assets, once symbols of unbridled power, were liquidated, sold off piece by piece, an elaborate fire sale of a once proud empire. Offices lay vacant, their glass facades mirroring the gray, indifferent sky, data centers hummed their last, mournful tunes before their servers were wiped clean. It was a corporate apocalypse, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms for generations to come. Cassandra Thorne, the ice queen who had ruled with an iron fist clad in a velvet glove, found herself stripped bare before the world. Her arrest, a spectacle broadcast live, solidified her transformation from untouchable titan to public pariah. Photos of her, hands cuffed, face contorted in a rare moment of genuine shock and fury, became memes, symbols of corporate hubris brought low. The public outcry was deafening, a collective roar of schadenfreude mixed with genuine outrage over the sheer scale of Thorne Corp's ethical transgressions, painstakingly unearthed and laid bare by Silas and his team. She was not just a CEO facing charges, she was the embodiment of everything wrong with the system, a convenient scapegoat for an entire era of unchecked greed. Justice, or at least a highly satisfying version of it, seemed to have been served on a silver platter of public humiliation. But amidst the clamor of victory celebrations and the gleeful recounting of Cassandra's downfall, a chilling quiet descended regarding Malakai, Kai Rook. He didn't just disappear, he evaporated. One moment, a ghost in the machine, systematically dismantling Thorne Corp's infrastructure with a digital flourish, the next, a phantom. No body, no suicide note, no trace of a flight manifest. Just a void. Yet, his presence lingered, a pervasive digital scent. Cryptic data packets, tiny, almost imperceptible bursts of code, began surfacing on the dark web, then seeped into the clearnet. These weren't threats, not explicitly. They were art. Distorted algorithms that warped corporate logos into grotesque, weeping faces. AI-generated manifestos composed of fragmented stock market reports and chilling nursery rhymes. Subliminal messages embedded in viral videos, hinting at vulnerabilities in global supply chains, in the very fabric of digital trust. He's not gone, Anya had mused one late night, staring at a projected fractal pattern that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. He's just moved his canvas. Kai had become the ultimate phantom menace, a postmodern Moriarty for the digital age. His chaos wasn't just physical destruction, it was epistemological warfare. He'd weaponized information, trust, and even the very concept of reality. The authorities hunted him, of course, their methods laughably analog against his digital elasticity. But the consensus forming in hushed tones within intelligence agencies was terrifying. Kai wasn't targeting a company or an individual anymore. He was targeting the idea of order, of stability. He was the glitch in the matrix, perpetually threatening to crash the system, and his continued, untraceable existence ensured that Trevor Phillips' level of pervasive, unsettling madness would never truly dissipate. His absence was more potent than his presence, a lingering shadow that promised future, unimaginable disruptions, ensuring that no one could ever truly feel safe in the new, digitally interconnected world. Silas, meanwhile, was hailed as a visionary. His human companies initiative, once dismissed as a quixotic fantasy, was now championed as the blueprint for ethical capitalism. Conferences invited him to speak, universities offered him honorary degrees, and venture capitalists clamored to fund his next endeavor. His face graced the covers of magazines, articles detailing his courageous stand against corporate tyranny. He had done it. He had avenged his father, dismantled Thorne Corp, and seemingly ushered in a new era of corporate responsibility. The taste of victory should have been sweet, exhilarating. Instead, it was metallic, like blood in his mouth. He stood on a gilded stage, bathed in the warmth of applause, but all he felt was the chill of the compromises he had made. The public saw a hero, a champion of the underdog. He saw a man who had manipulated, leveraged, and, at times, ruthlessly exploited weaknesses, just like the very people he had vowed to destroy. The Whisper campaign had begun subtly, almost imperceptibly, even before Thorne Corp's final collapse. Whispers about how he had pushed certain whistleblowers, how he had strategically leaked information to inflict maximum damage, not just expose truth. Rumors about the accidental financial ruin of several mid-level Thorne executives who had merely been cogs in the machine, collateral damage in his grand design. Silas Vane, one op-ed had mused, not quite an accusation but a question, is he a reformer, or simply a more palatable version of the monster he slew? He had achieved his revenge, certainly. Cassandra was behind bars, her empire shattered. But at what cost to his soul? He looked at his reflection in the polished surface of his new, sprawling office desk, an office he hadn't chosen for its grandeur but for its strategic position, overlooking the very financial district he had reshaped. His eyes, once bright with idealism, now held a calculating, almost predatory glint. The lines around them were deeper, etched not just by sleepless nights, but by the weight of decisions that had blurred the ethical boundaries he once held sacred. He had become a master of the corporate underworld, understanding its dark currents, its hidden traps, its brutal logic, not as an outsider, but as someone who had navigated its depths and emerged, not unscathed, but fundamentally altered. He had fought fire with fire, and the lingering scent of smoke clung to him. He was a survivor, yes, but survival had demanded a transformation, a shedding of innocence he could never reclaim. A knock, soft and deliberate, broke his reverie. Anya. She didn't wait for an invitation, simply pushed the door open, her silhouette framed by the city lights. Their connection was not romantic in the traditional sense, or at least, not yet. It was something far more profound, forged in the crucible of shared trauma and mutual understanding of the darkness they had traversed. She had seen him at his most ruthless, his most vulnerable, and hadn't flinched. He, in turn, recognized the steel beneath her quiet exterior, the keen intelligence that had dissected Kai's digital labyrinth, the unwavering resolve that had anchored him when he felt adrift. They rarely spoke of feelings, not directly. Their conversations were often clipped, precise, focused on the next strategic move, the latest digital threat, the subtle shifts in the corporate landscape. But there was a language between them, unspoken, conveyed in knowing glances, in the shared intake of breath, in the comfortable silence that stretched between words. They were two architects of chaos, one by design, the other by necessity, bound by the secrets they kept and the battles they had won, and lost. Theirs was a partnership built on a dangerous understanding of the world, a recognition that the fight was far from over, that the beast of corporate greed merely mutated, never truly died. Reports from Europe, Anya said, her voice low, placing a tablet on his desk. A new ethical investment fund just collapsed. Traces of digital art. Silas picked up the tablet, the glowing screen illuminating his hardened features. A distorted corporate logo, familiar yet twisted, seemed to wink back at him. Kai. The fight for humanity in business, he realized, was not a singular war with a decisive victory, but an unending, dirty skirmish. He had won a battle, yes, but the war raged on, its battlefield shifting, its enemies evolving. The cost of victory was not just his soul, but the perpetual vigilance, the gnawing awareness that the shadow he had helped create, the shadow of Malakai Rook, was merely the first in an endless procession of new, darker challenges that would demand an even more ruthless version of himself to confront. The new world he had helped build was safer in some ways, but also more complex, more insidious. And he, the accidental architect, was now its reluctant, tarnished guardian. Years later, Silas Vane sat in the high-backed leather chair of his sprawling corner office, the panoramic view of the gleaming metropolis outside a testament to Apex Dynamics' meteoric rise. He was no longer the haunted, desperate man who had fought tooth and nail against a phantom menace. Now, he was the enigmatic architect of success, a titan in his own right, his name whispered with a mixture of reverence and unease in corporate boardrooms. The holographic display on his desk flickered, breaking the serene silence. An anonymous, encrypted message. His fingers, still bearing faint scars from a forgotten war, danced across the interface. The text appeared, he's back. A new shell, a new target. Beneath the chilling words, a distorted image coalesced, a fleeting glimpse of a grin, too wide, too fixed, a plastic smile that once haunted his nightmares, now refracted through the shattered shards of an unfamiliar corporate emblem. The logo, though unrecognizable, pulsed with an unnerving, familiar energy, chaos contained, then unleashed. A lesser man might have flinched, might have called for security. But Silas Vane merely leaned back, the victory he had so painstakingly secured years ago now revealed as a mere ceasefire. The war had merely entered a new phase, the enemy more refined, more patient. This wasn't just a threat, it was a challenge, a perverse invitation. He rose, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city light sparkled below, an intricate tapestry of power and ambition. His reflection, superimposed against the urban sprawl, seemed both dominant and subtly predatory. A slow, knowing smile stretched across his lips, devoid of warmth, hinting at a readiness, perhaps even a dark anticipation. The game, it seemed, was far from over. And this time, Silas Vane was ready to play without limits.